living La Vida low carb. This show is changing lives. We talking about your diet, trying to get you feeling right. Cut up them avocados, fry some eggs, time to explore the longest running health podcast, hosted by Jimmy Moore. Time to give up the crappy garbage, we're getting into ketosis. Every day is a new step to your goal, yeah, you're getting closer. Motivated and focused, don't stop, just go. Time to get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com.
So, Matt Cooper, we already did this one time before. We were on Instagram Live, and for some reason, I went to upload it to Instagram Live, and I was going to grab the video for my podcast, and lo and behold, Instagram decides to bleep things up a little bit. So,
Bastards.
A wonderful conversation. I know a lot about you, but you were very gracious to say, hey, let's do it again, and we'll do it on Skype. So that's where we are today for the podcast. So guys, go check him out over on Instagram. Rewire HP is his username there. He goes by Coop. Is that what your friends call you? Is Coop?
Oh, I've been Coop since I don't even know how long. Yep, that
I'm
is
just
it.
glad they don't do that to my last name, because my last name's Moore. I don't want them calling me Moo. So
yeah, right. Wouldn't want that.
He is a Rewire Health and Performance coach. Strength and conditioning is what he helps with. A lot of athletes, and you're going to hear about that here today. Helps with rehabilitation from injury and, of course, into nutrition. And he's here today because you have worked with a lot of kind of elite level athletes in MMA and in other sports. So welcome back. It feels so weird when I've interviewed somebody already and then I get them back on again. It's like, welcome where he goes.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll tease out some new layers in the conversation we didn't get to last time.
Yeah, I've done this before where things didn't work out with the recording, and I had him on a Skype, and I'm like, wow, the second interview was way better because I kind of knew what you wanted and to say, and then vice versa, and then it brought new thoughts. So yes, that's what will happen today. But I will start with the same question I asked you on the Instagram Live. How did you get into this world of kind of fitness and bodybuilding and helping people deal with their conditioning and athletes? Go.
Yeah, so I always joke that I went to state school and got obsessed with weird things. That's sort of how it started. But yeah, I was going to school for something that was semi-related, and then as time went on, what I wound up sort of finding was that I was really passionate about these things. And another sort of almost catchphrase, dare I say, of mine is like, what started as me search turned into research, right? And you start looking up this stuff for yourself. Is I think you've probably found other people start saying, oh, how did you make that transformation, or how did you do this and that? And I'm like, I enjoy helping other people with this, and I just like learning about it for my own curiosity's sake. And
yeah, one
thing led to another, and all of a sudden, like I'm working in the nutritional supplement industry. Then I starting to took some continuing education and was writing nutrition programs for just everyday people, some athletes at the time. That led into some training from there, and then one thing led to another, and now I'm still working with people of all sorts, actually, pro athletes all the way to people with kind of complex neurological conditions.
So in the supplement industry, I don't remember this from our interview, were you a formulator? Did you try to put together different supplements to stack to kind of help with various things? What was your role there?
Yeah, I actually helped with everything from direct to consumer all the way to working for companies, looking at consulting on like formulations, stuff that happens behind the scenes. So I've bounced around somewhere in the health industry. I mean, I've even done stuff with the addiction and rehab crowd there, that type of rehab. So yeah, I've bounced around the health industry one way or another for over a decade now, like about 15 years, I think.
Look, there's
almost
you can get in when it comes to the health realm. I mean, you could be at the top of the chain and be like a researcher and medical, have medical credentials, all the way down to working in a health food store. There's kind of the spectrum of where you could get in there. So while we're on that subject, what would be a supplement that if somebody wanted to condition their body to be more, have their body composition be where it wants to be, build muscle, lose fat, and kind of all the things that would be a supplement to a good, clean, healthy diet like keto, paleo, carnivore, whatever they're doing. What would be something that you would recommend that people should look into that maybe they don't even think about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll give you kind of two answers. The first one being, if someone's not taking any supplements, like the more foundational ones they'll want to start out with is like, vitamin D, electrolytes, vitamin K, things like that, of course. But because you wanted one that you said maybe they don't think about, I'll give you kind of like an underappreciated one. And I think that would probably be progesterone or pregnenolone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the reason for that is pregnenolone is going to be your like the precursor to all the main anti-stress hormones of the body, right?
Yes.
So there's that aspect of it, and then also it's a great way to continue to strengthen and improve thyroid function. On if most people on this listening to the show right now are probably going to be following some type of lower carbohydrate approach and or fasting. So it's a great way to help protect the thyroid too, especially if you're doing some other thyroid protective stuff. Then the thyroid hormone helps liberate a lot more of these, we'll call them post-cholesterol, post-saturated fat hormones from the body.
Yes.
For utilization, right?
So I remember about 15 years ago, it was right after I lost my initial weight on the Atkins diet. I was like, all right, I'm going to get serious. I'm going to hire me a personal trainer at the local gym, literally like a half mile down the road from here. I could walk to get there. It's so close. And so I go in there and there's this guy, I'm going to blow you up, man. I'm going to blow you up. I'm talking like a trainer. They all talk, oh, I'm going to blow you up.
Oh, yeah.
The bro heads. And so I got a bro head as my trainer. He's like, dude, you need to be on creatine. And so I start taking this creatine. It was disgusting. I put it in the water and but I thought, okay, what's it doing? Oh, it's going to fill up your muscles with water and kind of make you feel bigger while you're getting bigger. And what I ended up doing was retaining a lot of that water from that. It was a horrible experience with creatine. Like, I feel like people hear about things from a trainer, for example, they try them, but they don't quite get the results. Did I do something wrong, or is it just doesn't always work for everyone?
Yeah, the main problem being just sort of like bloating and water retention.
Yeah, and it stayed on to the point that I couldn't get that weight off, and I had just lost 180 pounds, and so I was kind of pissed. I'm like, wait a minute, I put on 20 pounds in about a month after taking the creatine, and I tried everything to get that off. I think it did something in my body.
That's interesting you say that. There's not a lot of research on creatine utilization in people who have lost such a dramatic amount of weight in such a short amount of time. So yeah. I could see a situation in which maybe the tissues were almost hyper responsive to maybe being reinflated, quote unquote. It's not exactly how it works, but just so everyone at home can understand, with with fluid, yeah. Right? So I think the creatine probably worked. I think you might be, at least at that time, have been a bit more on the sensitive side to it. Usually you're talking about water retention primarily in the muscle bellies, right? Which is where you would want it to help facilitate recovery. Creatine also can be good for your brain, energy production, strength, so on and so forth, right? But at that time, I'm wondering if some of it went into some of the excess tissue that might have been on the body, and that might have made it a little more difficult to get rid of. I mean, I know a lot of people bloat a ton on creatine. That's a pretty common thing. I'm just wondering if it was maybe a little exacerbated because of the state that your body was in at that time.
Yes. Like, I lost 180 pounds in 11 months. So it was significant amount of change in the body. I was trying to be proactive for my health, and damn it, it didn't serve at that point. But
man, damn if you do, right?
I don't worry about those things anymore. It's just, I'm just going to live my life. I don't worry about overly needing to supplement XYZ just to get where I want to be. I put in the work and we see what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, I understand that.
Well, let's get into some of the work that you do with these athletes. You've got a lot of MMA fighters. You've got basketball players. Tell us, anybody we know? Yeah,
actually, just last night, Piera Lafayette, she was on Dana White's Contender Series. She just won a contract in the UFC. So it's people who are followers of MMA might know her. Other people I've worked with, they might know Mackenzie Dern, Justine Kish, Shaymon Moraes. Let's see here, Bubba Jenkins. I'm Sabina Mazo from Colombia. There's a lot of them in the MMA world. Basketball, I've got a couple guys that are gonna get drafted too. Like people might be following on the come up, like Dylan Andrews, LZ Harrington. I've worked with some pro overseas guys. Some shorter term sports science stuff with NBA guys. So some Olympians. I'm trying to think. Yeah, those are probably the main ones right now that I'm working with for the moment.
And look, I mean, athletes are athletes. Like you could be Tom Brady, you could be Zion Williamson. I mean, athletes have a special kind of, they're a special breed is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And you work with them, you are one yourself. You're an athlete yourself. And so when you put in this time and effort, you know, they are like trying to just fine tune, optimize who they are, how their body operates. And we were talking in our Instagram Live about Brady at 44 years old doing all the things that he's doing. And it's because he's put in the time, the effort to be his own best advocate for how his body works. And whatever he's doing, he's defying all odds of what every other NFL quarterback has ever had, other than maybe George Blanda. I think he played till he was 50, but not at the level that Tom Brady is playing at 44.
Oh yeah. I think with the comparison we made in the first convo was him and LeBron James, right? Like, are they both going to be playing until they're, 45, 50, something like that? Because neither one is really show. I mean, they're a little maybe, slowing down a little bit, but the level that they're performing on is, many times beyond what most guys at that age can pull off.
Hey, LeBron scored 30 in his debut game as of the recording of this last night. He scored 30 points. And so 30 at the age of, 37, 38, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
That is old for an NBA player. I remember when I was growing up, I watched the Lakers and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They were always talking about the old man on the Lakers, and he was 40 years old.
Right, yeah, the old man.
He still had the sky hook, though. He could
still had the sky hook.
Ball, as long as you condition yourself and stay in it. None of those guys are lackadaisical. I remember, LeBron had the Space Jam movie last year. So he was in the off season not able to do as much of the work that he normally would because he had the Space Jam to promote. But you still put in the work. You know what needs to be done.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that was the reason why I think the Lakers didn't do great last year was you had a consolidated offseason, right? Them and the Miami Heat went from being in the finals to about a month later they were starting the regular season because of
it was 6 between the bubble and then the start of the new season. And I'm like, really? You're going to kill these guys?
Right. And he had to film Space Jam too,
Yeah.
So it's like, I can imagine he didn't really get to work on his body the way he probably wants. And in a very rare way, he actually had nothing insane, but he had some, light injuries last year, kind of some ticky-tack kind of stuff that kept him out. So
that he's never had in his whole career. So that tells you how important this conditioning is, and kind of following the routine of someone like yourself. Like even his coaches and his conditioning people were probably like, Braun, you got to take a rest. And like this year, he's already saying, I'm not titrating back my minutes. And he wants to play more because he knows how valuable he is to his team being out there. And that's kind of what you're doing. You're trying to get your athletes into the mode where they can perform at their best, get their rest, and come back strong the next one. And yeah, that's the holy grail of athletics.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's the difference between a lot of those classic trainers and sport performance coaches is like you don't want to just be a wham bam beat 'em up trainer, right? At all. Like that, you could get fired for that with what I do. But you got to know, like, all right, if you were building, let's say, a CrossFit athlete, you're trying to build a tank. You're trying to build a resilient athlete there. A lot of the times with these fighters, they're a mix of both, right? They're kind of a Ferrari and a tank. And then with the basketball athletes, they're really a Ferrari. You really want to like rotate the tires, gas them up, do all those things without grinding them and beating them into the ground, because load management is just such a thing. And they are in a sport, unfortunately, where injury is a bigger possibility than a lot of those other sports.
Yeah, I mean, people look at football being such a hard contact sport, but I think basketball with all the running up and down, and you can just step on a guy's foot going up for a rebound, coming down, and then your foot just goes, whoop, and
Right.
such a propensity for those injuries to happen. Well, we saw it with Gordon Hayward at the very played Boston Celtics, and he breaks his leg. It's like, my gosh, within the first minutes of the NBA season, his season was over.
Yeah, he had a broken leg the same way Paul George did for the Team USA runs. I think a couple of years before that, the same way I don't remember that college player, Kevin Ware did. Wild. There's so many like different epigenetic levers that can go into an injury too, right? There could be, did you not sleep the night before, or just in general, so your nervous system co-contracts at the wrong time, and then an injury happens? Were you maybe eating an excess of things like wheat, gluten, polyunsaturated fatty acids, maybe some frankenfoods with refined sugar in there? Did you have nerve inflammation that sort of planted the foundation for that to happen? Was your training not great? I would consider this show kind of an anti-establishment show in sort of a positive, show people the new way, teach people how to think, so they can be their own guide kind of capacity. And just know the same thing exists in training, right? A lot of what the mainstream sort of holds to be true as sacred cows are really not. So anyways, a lot of the guys, even at the highest level, don't have great training. They might have great resources, might be a lot of money that goes into it, but if that money is barking up the wrong tree, you're just going to have a stronger tree of maybe some of the wrong ways to do things.
Absolutely. I remember last year in the NBA bubble at Disney World, they had all the players wearing one of these things, the Oura Ring.
Oh, yeah.
So that they could optimize their sleep. And it does other things too. If you guys haven't checked it out, or they're not a sponsor or anything, I love the ring. I've been with them since beta testing on this, Matt. Wow. And I've tracked it every day for about 3.5, almost 4 years now. All my sleep data I posted on my stories and everything, because I think it's important for us to focus on those kinds of things. And you don't usually think about that when it comes to performance recovery, but it's so important. So I thought that was really cool. The NBA invested in something like this technology to help their players kind of quantify how they're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, we live in an age where there's a lot of technology, especially on the wearable side, that can kind of be superfluous poppycock, if I may use a Greg Popovich quote, meaning it just doesn't mean a whole lot, right? And so Oura is, from my understanding, one of the most accurate in terms of sleep. Another solid one is BioStrap. Yeah, that is a lesser known version of Whoop.
Yes.
And then in addition to that, another one that I like is more of a diagnostic tool, at least as a coach, is the Omega Wave, because it's sort of like giving you a little bit of like looking at different check engine lights in a systems biology kind of capacity.
So heart rate variability, do you do some of that with your athletes as well? And how important is that?
Yes. So I want two answers to that. I do. That's actually folded into some of these things we were talking about, like BioStrap and Omega Wave, for example. Omega Wave is pretty cool because it also measures something called DC potential, which is a low-level brain resting electrical frequency or slow cortical potential. And it's been correlated with the ability to perform higher, more complex motor tasks, right? Or sports, right? In some ways. So when you fold a few different things together like this, you can kind of get a proxy on how someone's doing, even if it's not the end all be all, right? Yeah. And then what was the first part of your question there?
Yeah, it was just basically, do you do HRV athletes, and then why? What are you trying to determine there?
I remember now so the train of thought I lost too was, in this day and age, so many of my athletes, I mean, your and I's generation's a little different. We can kind of plug into technology and plug out of it because we were used to it growing up, right? So a lot of these kids, though, are just spending so much time on social media. Like, there was an article that came out a few years ago where Andre Iguodala is like, yeah, these younger players are just always on social media. I think it's a problem. Some of these college football coaches have actually, kid you not, some of them have had to schedule like a couple minute breaks every half hour because the kids get anxiety when they don't have social media. So part of what I'm also doing here is helping the kids, if they're student athletes coming up, a little easier with established pros, just try to opt out of the digital culture where and when they can. There's different ways we could take the conversation, from technocracy to just simple health. But I think for the people I'm helping, it's just helping them not get a lot of their neurotransmitters, their reward-based feedback systems in their brain, like dopamine, for example, get sort of short-circuited there. And then also just helping them, more importantly, tune into their own intuition again. All right, let me check in with my body. How do I feel? Right? Does my joint feel more inflamed today? Do I just not really have it? Is there something I could do to come back from that, right? Food-wise. So I try to strike a balance of getting accurate diagnostic tools and then also helping them tap into their own intuition too.
It's incredible. People that don't take advantage of these diagnostics to kind of see where they are, and they're like slapping a CGM on the back of your arm and kind of seeing where you are in the blood sugar. If it's available, why aren't you using it? Like, I think a lot of people, Matt, they don't want to know because they know it's bad.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what I like about the technology too is that it can start some conversations as well. It's like, all right, I can't look at this HRV and say necessarily know where, or this omega wave report and know where it came from, but I have something that's objective. It's not me just putting on my grandpa hat in the kid's eyes. It's like, hey, this is your check engine light. How did you sleep? What have you been eating? Is there something going on in your life that we need to talk about, off the court? It just starts that conversation of, or should I say, it makes them more open for that conversation of barking up all these different trees in this sort of alchemical constellation that culminates in your health, performance, and well-being, right? So that's one thing I like about it too, is that in this sort of techie, data-driven, video game sort of athlete crowd, it's like, okay, well, this is saying I'm off. Maybe I don't actually feel as good as I think. Maybe because athletes are terrible at reporting symptoms. A functional medicine practitioner, Ryan Freisinger, buddy of mine, has said that for a long time. And so sometimes it's like, they're willing to run through a wall, and you have to let them know, like, wait a minute, I don't want to know if you could get it done. I want to know, can you get it done with flying colors?
Well, and there's the problem working with athletes, especially late into a season. I remember hearing interviews from ex-NFL football players, and they'd say, yeah, the first 4 or 5 weeks, no problem. But when you get to week 14, 15, 16, and now 17, they added another one to their schedule. You just kind of go, I just want to get through it. But you can't even let your guard up. You're dealing with all these nagging injuries. And so, like you said, they don't think about, hey, I feel good, but it's good within the context of where I am in the season. Everybody's got injuries and little nicks here and there. You just tolerate them. So you feel like that's your normal when it's not your normal. And it takes you the whole off season to recover from all those injuries of a season, just so you can do it all over again the next season.
Yeah. I mean, if you listen to anybody, like some of those strength and conditioning coaches will travel with teams. The players, like everybody will say it's a grind, and you kind of just get used to hearing that, and you're like, what does that really mean? But if you look at the travel in an NBA season, it is worse than probably any sport besides MLB. And I would even say, because there's less of, again, MLB, insanely technical, high-level athletes, of course. But in terms of a load, there's more load going on the body with basketball. So it's almost like, in football, it's only once a week. It's brutal, right? Like the load on the body, but it is once a week. So when you kind of cumulatively add up these things, right? Like changing time zones, we know what that does to circadian cycles and immunology and other aspects of the body. When you add up, maybe 5 games in 7 nights, and with basketball you've got less guys on the team, so you're expected to play unless you're sort of one of those older players in all of those games, right? So you add up these different things, and I think that NBA probably has the most epigenetic inputs or maybe negative inputs coming in from different areas that you then have to kind of take a look at and manage. And sometimes it's like, the Phoenix Suns, for example, have this quadrant system for periodization and programming, and they're like, you know what, if we had hard practice today, today's actually a good day to do a lift, right? Because instead of having something to do every day that the body then has to recover from, I'd rather just give the guy the day off tomorrow. If you think about stress holistically, that makes a lot of sense, right? So, especially if you're also maybe using diagnostic tools and things like that as well.
Yeah. And sensing that need for the rest is just as important as pushing them to push their bodies on the days that they are well rested. And I would think within your world, kind of all these other lifestyle things, we're going to get to nutrition in a minute because that's very fascinating to me, but all the other lifestyle things of getting like sunshine exposure and grounding and meditation and sauna, ice baths, kind of all the recovery types of things, and red light therapy, like those have to be a part of this equation as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, going back to the constellation analogy I said before, the way I work with people is try to just say, all right, like where are you at in each terrain, and what's the minimum effective improvement we can make in each area? That would be light exposure, right? Morning light, evening light, just spending more time in sunlight. If you're in a place like, one of the players in Minnesota or something like that, you're probably looking at, your red light there. I think most people should do red light therapy, to be honest with you. But, in their case, they're going to need it more than like someone in Miami, right, who plays for the Heat or someone like that, or us in sunny California. So there's the light aspect, and then there'd be like sleep, stress management, nutrition, supplementation, so you're kind of just trying to like look at someone as like, if you're familiar with alchemy, what's the transmutation going on there? What can we do in these different areas with the levers that we actually have the ability to pull, right? And just know that when you see LeBron go up for a giant dunk, or you see some amazing display of athleticism or an injury, that's the summary of all these different inputs there, so it's impossible for someone to say, I'm going to create this program and prevent injuries forever. I mean, from a training perspective, it's like, really, like, number one, contacts, in shit happens, right? Contacts still happen, contact injuries. And even for non-contact injuries, the training matters a lot, but you also have to have all these other inputs running smoothly as well. Nutrition, for example, can influence mobility, tissue pliability and responsiveness, tissue quality, just to give you one sort of example that most people wouldn't have even thought of.
Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing the technology that's out there. I just got back from a biohacking conference in Miami, Florida.
Oh, cool.
Congress, and the big thing there was red light. There were like 3 or 4 different vendors that had various technologies. One of them had a prototype there that you like put over your head, and it would shine down the red light. And of course, you try to have as much skin exposure as possible. They said it will be the first red light therapy that will also produce vitamin D. So you're talking about the Minnesota players having trouble getting, enough sunlight. So they would do red light, but usually traditional red light therapy and even like infrared light, not just the sauna, but infrared light doesn't produce vitamin D, but they've figured out a way to do it. So I thought, wow, that's kind of innovative.
Yeah. That's wild. I'd be curious to see that. My friend, good friend, Pete Bowman, who works with Dave Asprey, was actually, at the conference too. You guys might know each other.
Yeah. Yep. I think he was also at Dave's event a few weeks back. So yeah, I'm getting into more of the biohacking kind of world, because like diet world, okay, cut your carbs, eat real food. How hard is that? Like, it's not hard. Let's dive into what you do nutritionally with your athletes, because it does seem simple, but when you're brand new to why carbohydrates maybe aren't the big deal that they've been made out to be, maybe why saturated fat and other kind of natural sources of fat aren't as harmful as maybe they've heard. I think athletes are more in tune with what the truth is about nutrition than the general public.
Yes, I would say so, because they're also used to doing something, and then even if they don't know what lever is being pulled, they're used to like saying, all right, well, I feel good out on the court, or I feel good in the cage, I feel good on the field. And so they can kind of come back and say, well, this worked for me, it didn't work for me. Obviously, that's not always the most scientific response, but I mean, in a lot of ways, really, like the food you should be eating should be easily digestible.
Yes.
You shouldn't provoke some sort of inflammatory response or put you in a weird headspace. Should give you energy, right? So there are some pretty simple things that the average person can kind of do when they're eating, especially if they're in tune with their body, to really kind of know if something is going to work for you or not. Now, that doesn't mean that some athletes can't sort of go off the rails, right? So like some of these guys who tend to get injured a lot.
Yes.
I don't want to name names necessarily. I mean, I don't work with these specific guys, but a lot of these athletes that do follow plant-based diets in the NBA, I'll just say that they tend to be the most injured. A lot of them have stiffness and immobility or tissue pliability, tissue quality issues. They don't always necessarily have the big one, I say, or like a Achilles tear, ACL tear, hamstring tear, but they at least have a lot of ticky-tack injuries, right? So you'll see that happening. They tend to underperform. They tend to have like a less endurance, but unfortunately, so this would be an example of maybe not being in tune with the truth. There tends to be this big time honeymoon phase with vegan or vegetarian diets, right? And you feel amazing until you don't. And that usually lasts somewhere between 1 month to 2 years, depending on the athlete.
It makes sense why they feel amazing. They're off crap. Like I told the story on the Instagram that we did. Lamar Odom used to have a really bad kind of candy habit that he would just eat candy and candy and candy all throughout the game. He'd have that because he was a sugar burner and he was trying to, I guess, refuel his sugar throughout the game. And then, you saw him post career and you kind of go, whoa, he blew up. That caught up to him.
Yeah, exactly. I think we talked last time on the call too, as someone who's worked with both the athlete, probably one of the few people who's worked with both the athlete and the addiction crowd. He probably was substituting the modality of addiction from drugs to sugar to, all right, is it going to be now? Is it going to be gambling? Is it going to be busyness? Never being able to sit still one way or another. Very seldom does addiction start physiological unless, mom might have done something when you were in the womb that kind of you became addicted to that substance. Usually it's habitual and then afterwards becomes physiological, like in the case of cigarettes, right? He's unfortunately kind of a cautionary tale there. And then you see some of these other guys though, like you said, is veganism an improvement on what they were doing before? Possibly. For a lot of them, they're eating frankenfoods. Who knows if they're really absorbing much, if any, of that protein from some of that, the like fast food type because basketball players have like the worst diets, right?
Well, I remember Michael Phelps during one of the Olympics, they did all these headlines. He eats 10 to 12,000 calories a day, and a lot of it's McDonald's. And it's like, it was funny how they were hyping it up, not realizing, okay, this is a very elite Olympian, like one of the greatest Olympians in America's ever produced. He needs that fuel, maybe not the specific fuel that he did, but at least that fuel got him through the race. And he, as far as I know, even post-career, he's never lost that big, slanky, very built body. He's not gained weight. So he had the ability to take on those calories for that targeted purpose of performance. And the payoff is he's got a lot of gold medals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've worked with that kind of caliber athlete in different sports, including actually Olympic swimming. And he's still stayed very lean. I think some of that stuff might have been overblown, and they looked at maybe what was more akin to like a cheat day for him. With the vegan stuff, I mean, a lot of those guys, when you tend to do a new approach on any diet, you tend to cut out crap. You tend to maybe eat a more reasonable amount, and you tend to do some other things that you weren't doing before. I'm going to sleep well. Very rarely do people operate in total silos, like, I'm going to control one variable kind of. That you and I might, because we want to see what happens, but for the most part, they are not. And so there's a few things going on there, right? Maybe they're getting off sort of like really low quality, like frankenfoods in general. And then that is also part of why they're feeling better. Maybe they're also making some of these other changes. And then also, again, and this could be with any diet, I don't want to pick on anyone specifically, but the power of placebo, right? They've shown that if you believe, the Biology of Belief's a great book. If you think something's going to work, they've been able to measurably show that it is 40%. It can be up to 40% more effective than doing nothing at all, and a belief that you do not. The same exact thing, maybe is not going to work, right? So I think it's actually more than that, but that's all that they've really been able to measure and pull off in a lab setting so far. So I think there is a bit of that going on. So that would be another way in which athletes don't always hold on to it, hold on to the truth. Another way in which they might, their truth GPS might be kind of off is a lot of them have been used to being elite while eating crap, right? So you have guys like Derrick Rose and Dwight Howard who planted the seeds for their injuries by creating poorer tissue quality. I mean, again, without knowing anything about the sleep
Right.
type schedule. But let's just assume this, the high impact forces on the body combined with maybe a number of inputs, then exacerbated by nerve inflammation from eating, a lot of frankenfoods, right? Like, and again, I'm not going to be the one who says that is anti-sugar if it's coming from like fruit or something like that, even if the glycemic response is the same. But, Dwight Howard was eating, in the almost double digits of candy bars a day, right? That is a frankenfood from a few different directions, from lack of, nutrition, polyunsaturated fatty acids, wheat, gluten, the refined sugar, things like that.
Right.
So anyways, those things can add up. They can cause performance issues, including injury potential.
And Dwight Howard has even credited his first stint with the Lakers. He's back with them now, but his first stint with the Lakers back when Kobe was still playing, they did kind of a low carb experiment with that team in the late 2000s. Dr. Kate Shanahan, a medical doctor, author of a wonderful book called Deep Nutrition and some other things. She's on the vegetable oil kick now, trying to get people off of vegetable oils. The very poorly named vegetable oils. There's no vegetables in vegetable oils. It's seed oils, guys, and highly inflammatory. And so Dwight Howard says, yeah, she turned my career around, because he was prone to injury. He did not play well in his first stint with the Lakers, and then got off of those processed foods and more onto real whole foods. And now he's still thriving here a decade later.
Yeah. He's had a lot of longevity, and I know a lot of people used to goof on him and say he wasn't a winner and all this kind of stuff, but he's had a Hall of Fame career, and he's really, I think, shown that he is a winner, right? I mean, I think people the media can run with these narratives in a lot of different ways, right? So it's not that surprising to see him really kind of like change his reputation. And again, I think part of him lasting as long as he has in the league as a big man, especially as the league has changed to favor more space. Yes. Yeah. And you need to be able, as a big, ideally you need to be able to kind of defend in space a little bit more, at the very least, keep up with some of those lineups.
Yeah. Good luck with Steph Curry. So ain't nobody keeping up with that guy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's some guys where you're not going to want to you're not going to want to find Dwight ISO'd on some of those guys in certain situations. But that being said, though, largely he's been able to keep up with the game, to still be effective, still be a rotation player. And I think that comes with taking care of his body. I know he does some, at least in the past, has done some interesting, very innovative, forward-thinking training work. You mentioned biohacking. I don't know if you saw the new fit or some of that direct current electrical stimulation technology. So he's done some training involving that. And I know they probably had that at the conference. And yeah, he's taken more of an ancestral-based nutrition approach. And I think that kind of nicely sort of kind of folds into the next thing that I think is important to bring up, is the idea of periodized nutrition that we talked about in our first.
Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of these athletes are still eating carbs, but they're not eating Eggo waffles, as much as the average person, maybe on occasion as a treat, but they're not eating those things. They're not eating candy bars. They're, at least in that capacity, but they're getting their carbs from things like rice, potato, fruit, things like that.
Yeah.
And, they're also utilizing the type 2B fast twitch muscle fibers a lot more than the average person. That's that hairline trigger kind of LeBron James style fast twitch style muscle fiber, right? Whereas most of us, when we go to the gym, we're using primarily the type 2A fast twitch muscle fibers, and that's going to be your typical weightlifting style fast twitch. You're not really doing it with any type of quick nerve contraction velocity and that kind of neurological response, but you are, it's the same kind that a power lifter might use, right? So those can be fed with both fat and carbohydrates effectively. The ultra hairline trigger fast twitch type 2B, those are actually only metabolically fed with carbohydrates. So that's where there's some middle ground here in saying I'm going to go ultra high carb, or I'm doing absolutely zero carb, and just kind of saying context, right? If you are someone who's going to, even an everyday person who's going to sprint, who likes lifting weights maybe fast, who likes playing pickup sports, whatever, those would be days where your body is going to have the ability to utilize those carbs, almost like if your body was a hybrid car.
Right.
But by and large, most of your listeners, especially if you're just doing things like walking and stuff like that, that would be an example of a day where it's safer to go lower in calories and probably have more healthy saturated fats in your diet, right, on those days, because that's just the energy system that you're using. So this whole idea of eating based on energy system demands, I think, is something that not only athletes can learn from, but also just everyday people too, right?
Well, look, context is everything. And this is why I'm not a fan of dogmatism when it comes to nutrition. Sounds weird coming from the guy that wrote a book called Keto Clarity. You would think you want everybody to eat keto, but actually I don't, because keto is not really a diet, it's a metabolic state. And even with those athletes that you're helping them in the off season, maybe they're being a little more of a traditional ketogenic diet when they're not quite in performance mode. Even when they get back into performance mode and they add in those carbohydrates, again, strategically for the purposes you've already outlined beautifully, like they're still at the end of a game, if you tested their ketones, they would still be in ketosis even with all those carbohydrates. So I feel like in the keto world, we forget athletes are a different breed and they can get away with more carbohydrates because they're expending them for a purpose that's bigger than just general health.
Yeah. I think a healthily functioning body should be the goal, rather than people maybe chasing measuring ketone levels or really getting, I mean, it could be HRV, whatever, you don't want to get lost. You don't want to miss the forest because you're looking at the trees or major and the minors, right? We know the presence of ketones in the body is beneficial. I know last time we talked about both endogenous and exogenous. Maybe we can riff on that again.
We like to simplify messages, and you've done a great job of simplifying very complex messages here today. But even in my book, when I talked about getting into ketosis, okay, you can be a sugar burner or a fat burner, but the honest truth is you're both all the time. Even the most vegan of all vegan people, like Rich Roll, for example. He's a very famous vegan athlete. Do you know Rich? Have you heard of his work?
Of Rich. I'm not familiar with his work specifically, though.
Yeah, got a great podcast. I listen to kind of hear the other side and
sure.
learn. And anyway, and then he, in his vegan state, is in a state of ketosis at times, low levels, but he's utilizing ketones and fat. That's the way the body works. You're going to have this ebb and flow where you kind of switch back and forth. And I think it's that switching back and forth easily, which is what makes your athletes perform so well, is they're able to come in and out, being mostly sugar burner, being mostly fat and ketone burner, that helps them perform at their best, to recover at their best, keep inflammation low. That flexibility, that metabolic flexibility, is kind of, again, the holy grail that we're all looking for. We don't want to have to be tied to one nutritional way of doing things the rest of our lives. We'd like to have that flexibility to, all right, I'm going to carb up this day and then, okay, go back into ketosis a couple days later. That's kind of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think you've heard a lot of these people who kind of were maybe more zealot-like in their approach, right? People I love and respect, myself included, but people I love and respect a lot, like Rob Wolf, as we mentioned before, Dr. Kate Shanahan, Mark Sisson, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. They're sort of finding that middle ground with respect to metabolic flexibility and sort of saying, like, wait a minute, no, like, the main thing is you want to retrain your body to be able to burn fat again, and then after that, you have to realize the state of ketosis is a transient state. It's going to be higher at certain times. It's going to be lower at certain times. And that's okay if you're using the ketones. It's just a little confusing because where the diet got its namesake from was the ketones. So most people think that's the thing. But unless you're almost proactively trying to, on purpose, it's really hard to go back after you fix that metabolic machinery that allows your body to burn fat. So then as long as you're, eating real food, of course, sleeping, things like, all of your software is working appropriately, you have a little bit more wiggle room in there. So you'll see a lot of these people, like for example, Dr. Mike T. Nelson, talking about the idea of metabolic flexibility and, how, what, when, when should I eat, when can I go lower in this, higher in that, and basing it on activity level, the time of the month for, female athletes, things like that. So I think that's kind of where a lot of this conversation is growing. And I think you said it best, which is context, right?
Yeah. And I mean, even from an ancestral standpoint, those guys were like the kings of metabolic flexibility because they would go out and they would hunt and gather. If they came upon a big bushel of berries, they would grab all those berries, they would take them back to the tribe, and they would gorge themselves on all those berries. Now, they would be different than the big hybridized ones we have today. They'd be a little more fit. sweet, but still they would eat a shitload of those berries to the point that they would be out of ketosis. But because they're so well fat adapted, maybe they haven't eaten for a week because they're still trying to get an animal kill. That put them in a deep state of ketosis, but then the berries kicks them out. But they're going that back and forth. They didn't have to try to stay in ketosis. They just did through their hunter-gatherer activities going for an animal kill. And by the way, in that fasted period, that's how they were able to fuel themselves without any food. Is the ketones kicked in, they had stored body fat that became their energy source till they had a big animal kill, and then they just gorged themselves all over that animal and any kind of plant matter that they might have picked up along the way.
Yeah. I mean, and like you said, they weren't worried about getting kicked out of ketosis when they had the berries. It was like, oh no, this is food. Food is food. We need this, right? And I think that kind of also is maybe a useful conversation for your everyday person that might encompass like some of your listener base is, so sugar is, it has some anti-stress levers that it pulls in the body, right? So an insulin response, when insulin goes up, a lot of these stress hormones like cortisol, glucagon, they actually go down. So when you're craving sugar, I mean, it's sort of like when you crave salt, right? Sometimes it's very linear. How you feel is kind of a cause and effect, right? So when your system is sort of craving glucose, craving sugar, it's because you're in a stressed out state. It could be because of life stress, could be because you're undernourished, things like that. And so that's why a lot of people do crave sugar, right? And so and sugar is in some ways like it has that sort of what I don't even want to call it anti-stress protective lever it can pull. So if and when you do have it, I think something to be learned from the Dr. Ray Peat community is make sure it's coming from like fruits and things like that, where there's a high nutrient load with it. Whereas table sugar is going to be, what do they call it? High calorie malnutrition, right? Or kind of like an anti, like a, what do they call it? It's sort of empty and devoid of actual nutrients. It's just an energy source. It's a high energy, its energy to nutrient load is super low. Whereas with a fruit or something like that, they're both high, right? And so I think that's one way to think about food is aim for high, not just high caloric energy, but also high energy coming from like the micronutrients in there as well. And I think if you kind of stick by that, you're probably going to make a pretty good diet of that if you made that kind of like a one rule to live by.
Well, look, even a lot of the carnivore people are now starting to add in honey and fruit, and it's only once you've kind of healed why you went carnivore to begin with. A lot of people for performance purposes, but some people have like very real health issues. I've had on my podcast recently people with like bipolar, people with other kind of mental health kind of conditions that they went carnivore and it healed them, and now they're experimenting adding little bits of fruit or honey into it to see if they can tolerate it. And I mean, literally, that's what we're all pursuing. We're not pursuing eating any one way of eating the rest of our lives, never really changing. How boring is that, by the way? We're trying to, okay, did we restore some insulin sensitivity that maybe wasn't there before? All right, let's test it. Let's see how we do. Oh, no, ooh, I tried it. It didn't work. Okay, you're not ready yet. And life is a constant N = 1. At least it should be.
There's like two main reasons why people tend to get a lot of great results with it. Number one, like a lower carbohydrate approach that's high in protein to energy ratio, as Ted Naiman would say, can be effective in burning a lot of fat. Also, just a lower carb diet that has a sufficient amount of saturated fat has also been, especially in like a short term kind of more strict on ramp phase, really effective in helping your body burn a lot of the PUFA containing fat from the system and almost kind of resetting you. I think the other sort of triage point to make there is that part of why carnivore is so effective, at least as a short-term kind of hormetic idea, is that you're getting rid of a lot of like your guar gum stabilizers, like a lot of the filler ingredients.
Yes,
you're maybe getting rid of to talk about like Dr. Stephen Gundry of the Plant Paradox for a second. You're maybe getting rid of a lot of plants that you thought had nutrients in them, but actually like maybe had indigestible fibers because it was a defense mechanism that because they don't want to be eaten, right?
Yeah, the
lectins,
the lectins and the oxalates and all those dastardly things.
Yeah. And so you notice that's why a lot of people on carnivore, they tend to shred up a lot because they don't have that, maybe it wasn't body fat, but like inflammation, digestive inflammation going on. So, there's almost kind of like as a way to, with carnivore, I tend to use that as sort of like a lever to pull if someone needs to silence autoimmune condition, like autoimmune symptoms in like a shorter period of time. And then, like you said, you kind of baseline yourself and you're like, okay, chances are it wasn't this one thing. It wasn't just X, Y, or Z. Maybe it was like the interplay of the refined sugars with the stabilizers with, maybe these are just vegetables that are not as easy to digest that I shouldn't have as much, like a kale, for example. You heard Dave Asprey talk about maybe I should be doing more raw carrots, button mushrooms, stuff that's easily palatable, So I think from there, when you reincorporate stuff, you can kind of almost do like you said, an N=1 and see what does work for you.
Yeah, and carnivore also makes you amino acid sufficient. I think we are, traditionally as Americans, we're very over carbohydrated and we're under proteined. And so getting all those complete proteins and then doing them in sufficient amounts, I think the body rewards you for that. And we talked about this before, that when you eat kind of more of a ketogenic kind of carnivore approach, all the research shows it's incredibly muscle preserving. It's not catabolic, whereas kind of under eating, like the vegan athletes we were talking about earlier, they have to work hard to get in those amino acids because they're not eating any animal foods unless they include fish and eggs. They're not getting sufficient animal foods. So it's hard for them to maintain sufficiency in their amino acid profile.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Is like I think it really ups the protein quality for a lot of people that maybe they weren't getting before, and that serving as like a building block for tissue quality and various biochemical processes of the body. I think that's a positive. Another positive people get out of it. Their muscles are finally being fed adequately on a at least on a amino acid level. I think there's a few different things going on there, but yeah, I tend to do it how most of when that's a lever we pull, like let's say in an athlete's off season or with an everyday person I'm just starting off with, we tend to kind of like simplify it like that, almost do a carnivore type reset or maybe carnivore plus type reset, and then bridge into re-adding these things, these other types of foods, and then also playing with your macronutrients, your carb and fat fluctuations depending on your activity level. So I think a lot of times these dogmatic approaches then tend to get refined in time, and people realize that it's just another tool in the toolbox, and there's principles we can pull from keto, paleo, all these different things, and then kind of be principles over methods from there. Know when to use which method and when not, and how some methods can be stepping stones into a more longer term sustainable eating approach.
And look, all of this is tools in the toolbox. Especially with the athletes you work with. All right, what you got for me? And they're going to hear what you have to say. They'll try it for a period of time. Okay, that didn't work. What else you got? There's no like connection to them. You just always are searching for the next thing. And then when you find something, okay, you stick with it and you kind of go, okay, what else can I do to best optimize this working and maybe make it work even more in synergistic fashion? So earlier you mentioned, and before we get out of here, this will be the last question, the EKs, the exogenous ketones. Do they play any role working with your athletes? Have any of them been curious about them and maybe using them for performance purposes? Because they do flood your body with a good amount of energy for athletic performance. Have you seen them or the ketone esters show any efficacy with your athletes?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up again. Yeah, big time. I would say in the MMA crowd, you're also getting the added benefit, and the football guys too, of the neuroprotection. Yes. It's also a much cleaner alternative to the pre-workouts that you tend to see on the market because, number one, the kind I like, the real ketones kind, I think I should also say, I think quality is everything. I think getting some of these, the reason why there's some conflicting research with a lot of supplements, not just exogenous ketones, is they might be pixie dusted. What's on the label is not really in there. Maybe it's coming from a mass production, type place that doesn't really kind of contain enough efficacious amounts of these ingredients. But yeah, so the neuroprotection I think is a big lever to pull. I'd like to see, I think I told you last time, the concussion protocols for the NFL and UFC be revised so that in that, I think it's I forgot what Dom D'Agostino and others say, but in that 48 to 72 hour window following, to do some types of fasting and lower carbohydrate eating, because your brain's ability to deal with carbohydrates in that window is really impaired, even if you're an athlete, right? And that can cause some downstream problems with brain inflammation and things like that. Exogenous ketones, kind of like, more simply for everybody, right, is they can improve reaction time, whether that's grandma not tripping and falling, all the way to, sports being won and lost on fractions of a second. There's that. Less anxiety. Anything that's going to be good for your nervous system in general is probably not just going to work in a silo. It's going to have other benefits too. And so there's studies out there that show that they can dramatically reduce anxiety. I think also for a lot of these athletes, the bigger picture thing here is keto and fasting are survival states, right? Yes. And so if you think of your body as putting in green or taking out red, right? Training, things like that are reds. You want to have more deposits. So it wouldn't really be appropriate for me to, at least on a day-to-day basis, have athletes be fasting, have them in a lower carbohydrate source where they don't have an immediate energy source to fuel what they're doing. So exogenous ketones can be a way to, without maybe the body having to mine for ketones and mine for energy and create some of those stressful states, kind of almost in a protective way, take advantage of that fourth macronutrient offering that they have. So that way the athletes, it's almost like a way to top off their energy systems. I have, phosphocreatine, I have my oxidative system, I have glycolysis, but, Volek and some of those other guys, what I think the significance of what they showed is that the body will utilize the ketones first in sporting activities, and then some of these other things afterwards. So it's going to be more muscle glycogen preserving, more muscle preserving, and make you less likely to get into a survival state. It's a great way also just to add energy to the system without taxing the adrenal glands, right? Like some of these pre-workouts do. So, and we know now that, mitochondrial disease and energy deficits at the cellular level, that's the one common denominator across all types of dis-ease or bad or poor performance, right? So if there's something that I can do to improve energy production at the cellular level, that's going to improve everything I do, from thinking to muscle firing. Yes. To, immunology. And you and I talked too about how you shouldn't take an exogenous ketone and expect to just shred up fat loss wise, but it can silence inflammation. It can preserve muscle mass. So it also can improve satiety. It can improve, I think, blood sugar. Like it can improve insulin response. And if your cells have more energy, then they might be able to carry out other functions in the body more, like metabolic, hormonal functions that could maybe downstream from that result in some fat loss. But you shouldn't be taking it and thinking that I'm gonna get shredded just taking this. But can it set the table for some of these other things to happen with your health, fitness, and performance? Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and yet again, guys, this is strategic. Like the carbohydrates for the athletes, these EKs, you just have to know the context of what it is. That's why I don't like when people say, well, exogenous ketones are horrible. I'm like, not in every situation. I think people with traumatic brain injury would beg to differ when they need a higher GKI, glucose ketone index, which we didn't get back to in this episode, but we had lots we talked about in this one. Guys, yeah. Check out Matt Cooper, Rewire HP over on Instagram. And he's got a link tree there. Is it rewirehp.com, your website?
Rewire Performance is my website. It is kind of a fossilized website at this point, but the link tree you can schedule consults with me on. You're always welcome to DM me if you, whether you want to do an Ask Me Anything kind of call, or maybe you're local to the Southern California area and want to do something in person. I do. There you go. My shameless plug of the day. I do work with everybody from pro athletes to people with conditions and everyone in between. So I'll be updating that site soon. And yeah, you're always welcome to reach out. I think Instagram and my website are probably the best ways right now. I'm not really on Facebook anymore. And I've gone through the step of downloading TikTok. We'll see if I work up the courage to start posting on there.
You got to wiggle your booty on TikTok, man.
Man, my life would probably be easier. I'd get, be easier to do that than to research and, do all this other stuff.
Yes. Well, you were very gracious to come back on my show after we had a wonderful conversation on Instagram Live. This one went a whole nother direction. So I love that I could have another interview with the same person and it'd be totally different. So for those of you that watched the live version, you got a new version here today. But Matt, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Jimmy, yeah, you kidding me? I appreciate you having me on. Always a pleasure, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com. Woo!